Welcome, beloved, to the Tending the Roots podcast, where we explore the frontier lands of new culture creation. I'm your sometimes host, Corrine Bell, and along with the co-dreamers and friends of the Rooted Global Village, we'll be in conversation, exploration, and play with changemakers, scholar activists, and teachers dedicated to culture change work and seeding futures. I'm really excited to have on the podcast today Weena Pauly-Tarr, who happens to be a dear friend of mine and also one of our Rooted team members. And in Rooted, Weena is probably the person who, more than anyone else, and we're all body-centric in our own ways, but always is bringing us back to the body, to impulse, to kind of bodily knowing, and how we can engage with the kind of themes that we're working with in a space like Rooted, but truly from that kind of felt experience of this world in and through these bodies. And it's a really critical component to what we do. This conversation was fun because she's my friend and I love her. And also I think it felt incomplete in some ways to both of us. So I think we'll have a part 2 at some point. And it's also, kind of kitchen table talk. This is a conversation that kind of went in whatever direction it was going to go. We didn't have a very intentional focus for this one, except possibly to say that it had to do with kind of the ethos of Rooted and the kind of new culture that we're interested in creating within a space like this. So we open our conversation, and I'm talking about perimenopause and perimenopause's impact on my cognitive functioning and my verbal fluency, and how difficult I find it sometimes to show up in a space in a way that I feel expected to show up. And that has everything to do with the unlearning that we're doing and the culture that we are kind of critiquing that is linked to supremacist systems. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Weena. If you want to learn more about her, we will have links to her Instagram and her website in the description of this episode. And in the meantime, I hope you enjoy.
Hi, Annie. How are you? Hi. It's early for you. Well, 8:30.
It's early, yeah.
Yeah.
It's 8:30. It's not too bad, but I hope my brain. I feel like and we don't have to get into a whole conversation about this particular thing, but given the feeling I have right now, sometimes that I'm just at the mercy of my hormonal fluctuations, whether or not I'm going to feel like cognitively. See, that's the thing. I'm also a little bit hung up on showing up in a very particular way.
Well, because it's verbal.
That's something that it's very, very, that's it. That's what I struggle with so much. And I find that as I'm progressing in like perimenopause, that's only illuminated more and more for me because I have so many more days where I just don't feel like I have access to that.
Yeah.
It's so interesting. I don't know if you feel that too.
Yeah. And it like elicits a response of being less capable or fear. I mean, physiologically, like if I don't have access to quick thinking or my brain bringing elements together and synthesizing them into something coherent, I feel like insecure. So then I get a response of self-doubt, and then I worry and that makes it worse. And then, I want to just run to the hills and farm.
Oh, Weena, oh my God, I love that so much because it's so, I resonate so strongly with it. Like the land will never judge me for my lack of verbal fluency today.
Yeah, exactly.
With the land, I can just be. I don't have to be any particular thing.
Total unconditional positive regard. It's right there.
Totally. Totally. Come as you are.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it's so funny. Yeah, it's so funny. I know this could actually segue really beautifully, I think, into a conversation about Rooted, because I feel like a lot of it's so relevant to what we're talking about in talking about rooted in general. And like having spaces where we can show up and be anyway, truly be anyway, and not have it just be okay. It sounds almost like a strange, like odd, like, you know, permission granting thing, but it's more like we encourage it, I guess you would say. Or at least encourage the idea that there are multiple ways of being in a space. There are many, many ways of being in a space, and being like verbally cogent and present and able to articulate your thoughts clearly is only one way that we can show up.
Don't you feel like I mean, I often think that, well, I love the land metaphor, because if I think of, imagine you step into a rooted space and you feel the same way you do when you're in the woods, that it feels that sort of, I wouldn't say neutral, but accepting. There's not a lot of judgment or criticism or expectation even to be a certain way. And it makes me realize that it's all around what we're imagining, because maybe that is how the space is, but we're imagining that it's not. And then our somatic response to that imagination is, I got to get my thoughts online. I have to get really crystal clear and show up with something of value here. But maybe actually nobody's has that expectation. That's our imagination. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. I've thought about that a lot, actually. Yeah, how much of that is a projection of mine into a space? Or, you know, that whole idea that people don't actually remember how you were, you know, like you're sitting there riddled with like this idea that, you know, people are talking about how you showed up and how you really just totally blundered your way through that, whatever it was you were doing. And they're literally on to the next thing, and they probably didn't give it one thought, you know.
And if they did, it might have been of concern, like, oh, I hope Weena's okay. She's kind of flailing. You're like, that's how I felt when I showed up for SEAM right after 2 weeks of being off computers and really only engaging in things I could see and touch. And then being sort of thrust into that and feeling unprepared, or like I had an idea, I had a theme. I was like, oh yeah. Like I'm really working on it, but I didn't move it down. It just was like a weird floating ambient thought. And then I brought it in completely incoherently, tried to make it make sense, which makes it worse. And then sent people to breakout rooms. And I was like, Mickey, she's like, it's fine. And I was like, it's not fine. So then when they came back, I kind of, without wanting to make a huge deal out of it, I kind of had to call myself in and be like, y'all, I'm flailing here. I'm so sorry if that was confusing. I don't actually know what I'm saying. I'm not really. And I think in a way, I felt the room kind of relaxed too, because I think sometimes they think something's wrong with them, that they're not getting it. And maybe other people are. And I'm like, no, there's nothing to get, because it's actually really poorly laid out. Completely my fault. So, but it felt good to just like call it out and then show up in a more honest way. But that takes, you know, and it's hard to thread the needle between doing that and then making it about you, because I actually don't want to spend our session talking about how I'm not all the way here either.
Yes. Yeah. It's always that dance, isn't it? And at the same time, I know that it's really, I know that the response and the feedback is more often than not, like you said, you felt other people were also relieved just to have that acknowledged. And I mean, just the incredible amount of permission and invitation it is for other people to not just to have it be a space where we're talking about these ideas, but we're really truly trying to live them in the moment. You know, like there's such a, I know that if I witness something like that happening, because I know that I'm someone, I mean, I don't know, I'm sure it's just a human thing in some ways too. It's so easy for me to project onto other people this idea that they just have it all together, and I just don't. You know, I just don't have it together. So I think I remember there was one time I was had a conversation with Bio, and he was just having a moment where he didn't have access to his incredible vocabulary. And he kind of like fumbled some words. And I was like, oh my God. And he apologized for it. I was like, no, that was such a gift.
Total relief, right?
You're
I
human. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
This is great.
Yeah. Now I feel closer to you. There's two things it
Mhm.
makes me think of. One is I feel more settled when I have people in my house, when I've really cleaned. Now we can dive into all the unpacking of that, blah, blah, blah. I've kind of done it. And I've also just sort of arrived at a place where I'm like, it's okay. It's just what I do. I do the, it makes me settle. I don't always get to do it. And watching the difference between inviting people in and having, I enjoy hosting, although I do it in a bit of a like ratcheted up kind of way. The difference between that and then going to my dear friend's house where it's literally like a mess everywhere, like undone. And it's not that food is delicious and prepared and comes out. It's more that when I walk in that space, I'm like, yeah, whatever. And I kick back. I relax when I'm allowed to be inside the mess of somebody else. Cause it's modeling permission really that it's okay. So I think about that a lot in terms of what I think I'm creating settledness in myself, but there's also an impact on the people I'm inviting into the spaces I'm holding, which is, okay, we're gonna sort of, this is where we go.
100%.
We don't eat out of, I'm like, no, we don't bring food out of the kitchen.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, it's giving me a little bit of flashback from a time I was at a friend's house who was very much like that. And it wasn't that she was trying to be like that she was wanting to present some kind of perfection in the home, but it felt much more like a micromanagement situation where it was like, oh no, this is how this works. No, that's not how that works. You have to be careful because if this is, and I'm like, oh my God.
Like, get me out of here.
Yeah.
But think about virtual spaces too. It's the same, right? Like how tidy is our virtual space? Am I adhering to this outline I've written to the, no more comments. We're at time or, exactly. Or I also like, there's a responsibility to be able to walk through the door. Like I don't want someone to trip and fall on my mess. Right. And cause injury. So there's both. And I think it's always that dance between like, I do have to sort of be honest about what brings me settledness, but I need to open up to the co-regulation or the possibility of them affecting me. Maybe they're settling me. Maybe there's much more exchange and reciprocity in how someone's in the space that gives way to me relaxing more. I don't know. I think about that.
Yeah, because I was going to say the opposite of that is another dear friend of mine from when I was younger. The home that I'm used to them keeping. I haven't been in their home in a long time. And I think we're somewhere in the middle. We're not a super immaculate home family by any stretch. And at the same time, this home, whenever I would go to visit, I would have so much anxiety in my body because it was kind of like a new level of disorder. It's not just like untidy. It just felt like disordered, like lots of piles of things everywhere. Just the feeling that it would give me in my body, I could not relax in that home.
Yeah.
I just couldn't relax. It just felt like the way that clutter can feel like in a room especially when maybe it has something to do with the lack of movement of the clutter. I know it sounds very strange. This is like maybe really, it's just literally a thought coming to me right now, but it's like, these piles of things in places and like cobwebs and dust and kind of accumulating there, that these things haven't moved in a long time, right? There's no movement, there's no air, there's something not getting through and it feels stuck. And that's the energy of the space too. There's a stuckness to it. And so I walk into the space and every time I would, and I just would not be able to sit down and I couldn't wait to leave again.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I wanted to spend time with this person,
yeah.
but I could not be in the house for long. Yeah, I don't know. There's something about that movement which is so interesting to me. Anyway, and because we have periods of extreme anxiety,
For sure.
And,
Chaos. Yeah.
totally. But I think it is always that pendulum swing, it's like, we have time, then we clean up and then it gets chaotic again, then we clean up and it gets,
Yeah.
but there's that kind of balance act between the two poles, I feel like, and it's not extreme in either direction either.
Mm-hmm.
That feels, it feels like okay for me. But when it gets stuck in maybe one or the other,
Mm-hmm.
maybe that's where I start to feel that kind of anxiety rise up.
Yeah. Lack of movement.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm. Well, it hit me yesterday actually, because I was in a this is adorable actually. I went to a foraging birthday party.
Oh,
So
wow.
sweet. One of Joni's little friends, it was her birthday and she's really into mushrooms. And so there's this really kooky guy called, I think, Wild Steve or something, but he leads these foraging tours in New York. And it was fascinating. There were so many things you could eat. I had no idea. I walked by them all the time. Anyway,
That's so cool.
it was an exciting environment, and I had the opportunity to meet all these people I had never met, parents and friends. And it's one of those things where it's sort of exciting for me to just hear people's stories. And as we're chatting and I'm talking to these people, Rooted came up. And one of the women was a homeschooling mom. And I said, "Oh, are you familiar with Fair the Free Child?" She said, "Oh, of course." And I was like, "Oh, cool." And we have her as part of an organization I work with, Rooted. And I stopped there and I was sort of like, what do I say this is? So then I had that moment of like, what would Corinne say? And it used to be, we used to have sort of like the tag of like, it's a global community of anti-racist culture building was sort of like how I said it. But even saying that, I was kind of like, everyone's a little bit like, huh? So what do you do? Like, what does that actually mean?
Yeah.
So then I thought, I mean, that feels like a good question. So you're in this, interesting environment with interesting people that they're have very different stories than mine. And I mentioned Rooted, and I say it's an organization. And then how do you fill in the blank?
Yeah. And I wouldn't even say it's an organization because I guess by some technical definition, it isn't, which is so funny. So,
Yeah.
but I mean, it's so funny. I love that you got stumped there because I do all the time as well, like constantly. In fact, I'm so stumped by how I would talk about Rooted that I actually don't have any words for it. I know. I think I love that you were stumped by it only because it's what happens to me every single time. And we have had this tagline. The tagline that I've had, the kind of elevator pitch that I've had for a long time is, it's a communal space, working towards an embodied anti-racist culture building. So technically that's the definition that comes from somatic abolitionism, that last part, which is Resma's work, right? But I swear to you, I got so exasperated even at the thought of saying that sentence to people because I knew it doesn't say anything. You'd have to give a lot more information to make sense of what that means.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started pulling away from that. But what I've noticed is that it's kind of meant that I also don't talk about it
Mm-hmm.
very readily, when I'm out in public, unless we were to, I find the ways that I end up talking about it with people when I'm out and about who aren't familiar with it already tend to be through some kind of organic conversation where we start to talk about certain themes, right? Like if we land on something together and they say, oh, well, that's something that we do in Rooted. And then I can bring Rooted in that way. And I'm not looking for opportunities to bring it in. I just noticed that there are times where I'm like, well, yeah, that's what we do in Rooted. And it feels like it's a place that makes sense to bring it in. But in terms of, I think it defies like any kind of marketing, like traditional marketing structure, because it's not even a community for me. Now, I want to just preface that by saying I know that there are people in Rooted who do have a sense of community, and that's valid, and that's real and all of that. But the reason I pulled back from using the word community, and I know we've talked about this, is because of how much it connotes when you bring a word like that, and it's so loaded already. And I think for me, the thing that it does that I want to avoid right now is that it presumes relationship. When you say community, and we are actually doing the thing that comes before we use the word community, which is trying to figure out what it means to come into relationship, right?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly. Yeah.
we're a bunch of people who don't know each other. We show up in a space. To call it a community, and I've just experienced this for myself many times, the kind of cringe of being referred to as a member of a community where I don't know anybody. I don't know how I feel yet about being in the space. I don't know you. You know what I mean? We don't have the intimacy. We don't have the familiarity even yet to, I think, really honor what that word means when we use it.
And we don't have local proximity. Like, that's a huge
No.
component of it. I can say Jackson Heights is my community, and I don't know a lot of the people here, but that is because we're inherently in relationship to a location.
Yeah,
Or
that's a different thing.
right,
Yeah.
like community center, there's a place where people gather, so inherently there's a thing which you could call this virtual space a location. But there's something about not having my whole body be part of it, and in a way that I'm like participating in the sharing of air and sounds, that makes it different. So
Yeah, that's interesting. But I wouldn't say that there's no possibility for a sense of community in virtual space, right? Oh, that's
oh,
not what you're
right,
saying. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, no, but
But
it's
that,
almost a
yeah.
byproduct of something else. It's through relationship and
Yeah.
exploring things together that then out from the side door comes this feeling of community, rather than it being a
Yeah.
focal point of we're going to make this community.
Exactly. Exactly. And exactly. And I mean, think about it too. In your geographical location, there may be more of an imperative to be a part of that community. I mean, you're physically there, right, with these other people in a fixed geographical location. I feel like with a space like this, we're choosing to be here every time,
Mm-hmm.
and again and again and again. And I think about it a lot, in with respect to just how much demand there is on our time and our energy and our resources. So to elect to choose to be in a space like this where, I feel like there's the thing that's calling people to come into a space like this, they're not, well, not that they're not tied to material realities, but I feel like it's something else that's calling us to come together in a space like this, given how much demand there is on our lives, and for so many people. And like, I don't take for granted what it means to actually almost work against the force, the forces around us that are like, you don't have time for this. There's so many other things to be focusing on. um, what brings you together? Why are you there? What are you working towards? And like, especially if it's not something tangible and something that you can like pluck from the ground and eat
Measure.
tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But you don't know if or when it's going to bear fruit, right? Like it's so, it kind of astounds me when I think about that sometimes.
I feel like people are drawn by their curiosity. Honestly, it's like, oh, what is, I hear, I mean, it happens, I hear something, a sound I don't recognize. What is that? And so I'm willing to say no to a lot of the calls for my
Mm,
attention in order to sort of pursue some sound has some, there's a lure and it's lack of familiarity. I'm curious, like, what is that? Or it's like something oh, wait, that's a rhythm I know. Wait, what is that? And then I walk
yes.
towards it and I want to see what's
Mm,
happening. And then I see there are people engaged in a thing. Maybe I hang out on the side and observe. Maybe at some point I'm participating, but it does feel like that in Rooted, that there's some um the It's not a good image, but what came to mind was like, was the
Bring it,
lure,
Weena.
was an actual lure, like a fishing lure. That's like, some of them are quite beautiful. I don't know if you've been fishing lately, but like,
Totally. Fly
yeah.
fly
Oh my
fishing
God,
is gorgeous. Oh yeah.
gorgeous. And so it's like plops in the water and you're like, what is that shiny, beautiful thing? So I think, if we think of like, what is the,
Yeah.
but then
Or
it
the
sounds
follow
like we
through
hook
is not
you.
as
I
nice.
know the follow
Yeah,
through is not great. And then we get you. But if it's more, the sort of sparkly, beautiful thing that you go to explore. And then I think the part of rooted that feels so good to me is the porousness of it, that it can literally be brushing past something interesting and leaving. Or it can
Yeah.
be like the way that you're allowed to spend as much time in your own curiosity as you want is interesting, or that it has its own personal rhythm. Like, oh, I like to do this one thing once a month. Oh, I like to go every week. Oh, I haven't been in a few months. What are they doing now? Like and all of that's
Yeah.
permissible and
Yeah.
even sort of encouraged in the tempo, people's personal tempo with curiosity and what their lives hold, very realistically too. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I find that also really interesting. And also for myself, as someone who doesn't make it to every single event either, there is some very real sense of connection to a thing that I know is happening, that I'm a part of. So, even when I'm not at every single thing, I feel like I don't know, I wish there was like a better like an analogy I could talk about, or I could use here to describe that, but it just feels like maybe it feels like almost like the way that one, as you grow up from, if you grow from becoming, sorry, let me start again. It feels a little akin to like growing into an adulthood. And as you grow and you're in relationship with your parents from the time you're a child, and you begin to internalize them, right? So that you can kind of go out and be in the world. There's this kind of strange sense in which I feel I have internalized rooted. It has become this kind of almost internalized touchstone for me. So it kind of exists even when I'm not present in the space with other bodies. There's this kind of group of people, this assemblage of people who are coming together out of their own curiosity, to explore certain things. Maybe the things they want to explore, they're curious about, they don't even have specific language for. It's like a hunch, or it's like a little, it's like a little shimmer that, that they're like, but like kind of what you're talking, I mean, that is curiosity, isn't it? That's the essence of it. We don't necessarily know what it is, but we're curious about it and we want to lean into it. And all of those people kind of coming together, I feel very much resonant with. I think I resonate so much with people who kind of lean into life like that, who want to know like what possibilities exist for something else, and feeling connected to those folks, knowing that they're out there, and we're kind of like, we're popping in here, we're popping in there. Oh, now I see you in Seam. Now I see you in Resounding Joy. Now you're, is so meaningful to me. And I swear it's been this thing that kind of exists. Yeah. Like this kind of presence in my life that in certain moments I find myself feeling very connected to it. And it's grounding to me in that way.
I love that.
So interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I could say I definitely feel similar. And then it makes me think, what is the bodily feeling of that? This is something Liz and I were talking about yesterday, because I'm starting to really question this idea of belonging.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's a real thing. I almost think that it's actually some like dangling carrot out in front of everyone, and everyone thinks someone else has eaten it and knows it. And in fact, no one does. Like, we're all sort of like, oh, we were laughing because I thought, like, think of, a biker gang that like tours around the US, and you're like, God, they're so connected. They travel together, they eat together, they live together. And then you go talk to one guy and he's like, I don't know. I just always feel like they go together on Tuesdays and like I don't get to go because I have this, like you dig a little bit, and therein is like a deep lack of belonging, or like a feeling of self-doubt that they don't belong, or like they're not in it enough, and that's been my experience all the time. And I think it's interesting because sometimes I think, my positionality, cis heteronormative white middle class lady, woman, you'd think, wow, you have all the cultural doorways for feeling like belonging, right? Like all the media you consumed, or all the reflective images back at you that look similar. And that's not my experience at all. I don't look like that. I'll never be like that. That's not something I relate to. I don't feel like I belong here. Was a huge part of growing up. So in a way, I guess part of me thinks like, what does that mean to belong? And what does that actually feel like? And somebody brought this up in SEAM, and it was so beautiful. She said, I think the one thing I'm sure of is I belong to myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that's sort of like a prerequisite, right, for understanding belonging. And Liz brought that up too, that first you'd need to understand a belonging to self, which to me starts to open the door to belonging to physical self, which is already quite fraught for a lot of us. And so I don't know, it's just interesting to think of that. And when you say an internalized version of rooted, the word that came up is like belonging, like I belong there, or there's some sense of, to that which I belong, a group of people who are curious, who are interested in different frames, who want to look around the corner and be like, what does it look like for that person? Or like, what is that over there? That energy is something you relate to. There's resonance there. And when you're around people that are similar, there's a feeling of belonging. And then I thought, well, what is that somatic feeling? And are we associating something with the word belonging that's maybe not that word?
When I was working with this person with SE, the thing that came through for me really clearly, because she kept saying things related to belonging and belonging and belonging and wanting to belong here and there. And that was the first thing that came through for me really clearly, was it felt like that there had to be some kind of relationship that we're cultivating with this embodied experience. That actually becomes the foundation for an experience of belonging that then translates into relationships. And I actually assumed that that was the starting point, that it always had to start here with this, what we're cultivating in our own relationship with our bodies. And I think that is still very important. And I also think I've expanded it now to see how that's done in relationships, so that even when I'm not feeling that sense of belonging in my body because I'm in a state of, let's say, or feeling less connected, or feeling less kind of grounded, or whatever it might be, I'm feeling somewhat anxious, ungrounded. And when I feel that anxiety in my body, my perception is affected by that, the way I see other people, the way I interpret things, right? All the lenses that we experience the world through are colored by that experience. We know that, right? And so I know that if I meet you and I'm in this state and I'm feeling some anxiety today, because it's a very common feeling for me, I just feel it in my body. And it's been part of my life since I was a kid. And so when I show up in a space and that's there, then of course we know we're looking for like cues of safety and cues for danger. And we're always looking for those things. But if I meet someone, if I'm with you and you say something or you do something that lets me know I'm okay as I am, whatever it is, that you do or say, and it shifts something in me, then you can help me come back to that sense of connection and groundedness. and that I can access my sense of belonging again from that place. But
Mm.
that's a relational thing too. And maybe when we're talking about an experience of belonging, we're always talking about relationship, whether it's relationship with self or relationship with other bodies around us, non-human bodies.
Yeah.
I'm actually touching the leaf of a plant next to me right now. It's always that relationship that's
Yeah. I mean,
important
I
to it.
said prerequisite, and that I sort of like want to pull back from that in that, yes, I always start out orienting as like a reminder that I'm in relationship all the time.
Mm-hmm.
How I am with that relationship is an indication of kind of where I'm starting from, or what level of connectivity to space, or place, or others, or self is available, or so
Yeah.
yeah, I don't think it requires that. And like I said, a relationship to body is quite fraught. So the expectation that like you need to belong there first if you want to have any belonging, belong to yourself. It's like Jesus
Right.
Christ,
You're like,
I'm not gonna like arrive
okay.
there all the time. And like you said, that's when we can lean into the places where we do find a sense of connection, or find a sense of okayness and belonging, and because that shifts what's available, or what comes of it.
Yeah. But there's also such value, isn't there, too? And this is what I think Seam is really interesting, um, where I think Seam speaks to this really beautifully. But there's something also very, and this is something that Rooted, I feel like, reflects for me too. Are the many like spaces in which we can like what happens, for example, right? When I show up in a space, maybe I do have a lot of that. Maybe I just have like a sense of not okayness in my body. And I'm showing up in a space and I'm reading all the signs for not okay. And
Mhm.
I'm talking into the space, and someone's looking over, because we know how Zoom is, right? You're literally, it's so weird to talk to people in Zoom space, at least for me, because you see all these people in boxes. You're looking at the people and they have no idea that you're looking at them. You're like, maybe you're moving your eyes around the screen. They don't know that you're looking at them. And so they're like writing, or they're looking up, or they're looking out the window. And you're like, nobody in real life would do that to you. And if they did, it's such poor relational skills, right?
Totally.
And so if you're already feeling, or if I'm already
Yeah.
feeling this kind of feeling like I'm not okay right now. It's just not okayness. That's how I describe it. It's not
Yeah.
okayness. And then I show up and I'm trying to do a thing, and people
Mhm.
are doing their thing, right? And I like, it's not even a conscious thing. My body is just like receiving that as
Yeah,
disconnection. It's just receiving it
totally.
as disconnection. So it's only feeding this kind of loop, right? And
Mhm.
even
Mhm.
though everything in my conscious and intellectual mind can see what's happening, I know what's happening, and still it's happening. But there's something so interesting to me that is such an edge place for me. Like, how can I show up in my not okayness, not feel okay, not get even what I need, quote unquote, in that moment to feel okay, and
Mhm.
still be okay?
Right. And not
I mean,
and not
it's
sort of
shocking.
demand the space change in order to
Yes,
facilitate your okayness. Yeah,
exactly. I
absolutely.
mean,
Well,
the
that's the edge
fortitude
work.
that builds, that's the edge work. The
Yeah.
fortitude that builds is kind of mind-blowing to me,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah. And I also think I can get into a place of like, this is absolutely all my responsibility, and kind of white knuckle myself through something when really I could just ask for some help, as like, or speak out, like, I feel super unsettled. I don't need anything to change. I just want to say it out loud and have it be seen or
Mhm.
heard, because I know that will shift the power it's taking from me.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
so it's I feel like, I don't even know like what is the right protocol there, like to say it out loud, to take responsibility. I mean, obviously there's no right way to go about it, but it's a real thing, and I
No.
think many people experience that edge of, I don't know whether to say this out loud, to call attention to it. Is that going to make it bigger? Am I shifting the space by kind of asking to be seen this way? Is that okay? Is that good? Is that bad?
Yeah.
Am I taking responsibility? Am I being an adult? Am I being high needs? I mean, all these things we cycle through before kind of just being inside, I think the experience of discomfort. And then
Yeah.
really I had a session this morning. It was so interesting where, she said, since we've been working together, I have really begun to be able to stay with discomfort. But to what end? She's like, am I just supposed to hang out in this discomfort? Or I was like, God, no. But it's true. There's like there's something I think that can take over around kind of being responsible and reasonable and like, well, this is all mine, which is a place I can
Right.
tend to hold. And then I lose the opportunity for relationship and connection by not kind of saying like, I need help. I feel apart from everyone. And I don't, without it being um, um, a demand, right? It's like,
Yeah.
and I think that's part of what I hear in you're saying, come as you are space is even that is okay to show up in a way of vulnerability or asking or not knowing or white knuckling or having discomfort and allowing. To me, the word that keeps coming up is literally just willingness. It's like a
Mm-hmm.
willingness to be in a space and feel discomfort, a
Mm-hmm.
willingness to not stay in discomfort, a willingness to shift out of it, be affected by something else and realize, oh, I'm actually, you know what, I'm way more okay than I thought I was, or I actually do feel seen now, or it's the willingness for motion, for movement
Mm-hmm.
feels maybe like that's more of what when I say what comes before belonging. Do you hear those kids outside
Yeah.
on the street? I have the windows open. So cute.
It's so it's really interesting. There's so many threads that you touched on I wanted to pick up with, but I think the one that's feeling the most present is this question. I love the question that this person asked you, or kind of like, you've helped me stay with discomfort. Like, to what end? Like, what is this? Like, what is it about? I'm supposed to get uncomfortable, or I'm learning how to be with discomfort. And I would even stretch it with rooted a little further to say we're also inviting discomfort in certain ways, right? This is the whole premise of risking brave space that Leticia was guiding. This is the whole idea behind disturbing or disorienting or dislodging kind of some of the entrenched conditioning we have, we in a broad sense, broad stroke sense, for those of us conditioned, and especially in places like in the United States, Euro-American kind of Western culture, that we are wanting to dislodge and disrupt and disorient. And in the space of that disorientation, like, we're learning how to be with the discomfort in that, because it's, a lot of us are not very comfortable with kind of uncertain waters and a little bit of chaos. And I think there are people who maybe have a relative sense of okayness with that. And still there's this kind of like, where are we going? What are we doing? What's the plan? Where's the map? Somebody get us the map. I was talking to somebody, I can't remember who I was talking to now, but we're talking about like authoritative like leaders and thought leaders and people in different spaces who are like, I know the way, this is the right way, and I'm going to show you the way. Here's the blueprint for the way, and just come join me in that. And we're not doing that. We're saying we don't know the way, and we're trying to get lost even a bit. We're trying to kind of go off the map, and risk on these uncharted spaces or these uncharted territories we haven't been with yet. We're not trying to like blow our way into them. We're kind of in a kind of a, I don't know, this kind of titrated way. We're wanting to enter into those edge places more and more. And And I was saying, like, when we are either in our bodies, we're not feeling that, I'm not okay feeling, or when there's real crisis happening in the world. I was thinking about this with respect to patriarchy is a general term too. That when we feel this kind of sense of crisis, who do we want to lead us in those moments? We tend to, like, I'm going to say this again, these are generalizations, but I'm going to say them anyway, but we tend to, like, I think, kind of forego any sense of like a self-authority. That's also a cultural thing. And we look to someone to lead the way. We want a leader. And in a zombie apocalypse, I am going to look for someone who knows the way, who can find safety, who has the weapons to fight the zombies, who, like, knows where the food is. We need that in those moments. And I feel like we're, and this is I think in part a privilege to be in the kind of space where we say, let's risk something else now. Let's risk a little bit not knowing for a time, because we're trying to seed another way of being in this world. We can't do that without disrupting the things that have become so deeply entrenched that we repeat over and over and over. They're so well practiced in our experience that there's little movement, right? There's little movement, there's little room for something else, for something new, for something different. And so we have to take those risks, and we have to risk not having an authority.
And I would say, like, that
ourselves.
the mantra of, like, entering spaces where we don't know, like, that's my jam, obviously. And I also want to realize, like, that's also not the answer, right? Like, it can also start to become like, well, if I'm not knowing and I'm, like, ambient and uncomfortable, then I'm doing it right. The question is more like, what is the right we're trying to do? I think that keeps coming back, where it's like, if we keep replacing, like you said, this repetition of how to be just keeps being replaced with different language and different words and different philosophies, we're not really unpacking the first part of the how. We're just looking to fill it in. And so, in the same way of what you're saying, like wandering off the trail into the woods, every person is going to move into that differently. Every person might, and let's assume they're being called off of the path, first of all, that it's really a choice, not like, do you feel like you know where you are? Well, get lost. Because now,
Right.
now it's
Totally.
like being told to not know. And sometimes I find myself feeling like there's also a place for knowing, right? Like really knowing something. And I think, and I know you're speaking to that too, which it's a different kind of knowing from going into a webinar and learning some tools and be like, I got it. I know how to work with my kids' tantrum. Done. As opposed to being inside it, digesting all of these influences and voices and podcasts and information we hear, living our lives, having it metabolized, move into our cells, into a way that feels like our own, and then knowing what to do in the tantrum. That's different, which I hear is what you're sort of saying. It's like the invitation is, eat some of this, eat these tapas, like have a bunch of different meals and flavors, and just, we don't know how it will affect. We don't know what part of it will move into our bodies and jerk us forward or give us some thrust towards something new. We don't know. And so how those nutrients and elements and flavors work with your particular alchemy. We talked about like the bee honey, right? Like the honey that comes from each bee is different depending on their chemical composition. It's similar with like the invitations inside Rooted. Who knows what will yield from these places that we share, ingesting, consuming, sharing, exploring. And then when we're led off that trail, because we're curious, like, what is that over there? I feel okay to move off of this trail, and I'm touching this leaf and I'm exploring. At some point, I will reach a threshold where I'm not curious. At some point, I will be like, oh shit, where the fuck am I? Like, where is everybody else? What is this? What am I doing? What comes next? And that's also so reasonable, right? Like, and there's an impulse to redirect towards something that holds more form in order to shape direction of movement. So there, I think of it as like, when we're in that settled physiological state and there's an open curiosity that has many different pathways and can yield many different experiences, that's not necessarily the place to sustain forever. It's like visiting that location and then bringing back with you onto the trail the experience you had off of it, and then maybe sharing it with someone else and moving forward and then
Yeah.
leaving again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. 100%. Yeah, I feel like in a way it's so yeah, one of the things you said was it's not prescriptive in that sense. There's not like one way to think or experience or do or be or whatever in that disorientation and reorientation. I mean,
Yeah.
like you're saying, that's there's this book, Queer Phenomenology, that I really loved, that was kind of bringing that language in for me as well, around like what it means to become disoriented, to lose your way, and also then to kind of find another way back. But what's, I talk a lot about rooted as this space that's kind of going off map, but not without a navigation system. So, this idea, and I feel like that's a little bit what I'm hearing you speak to when we're talking about not being without a navigation system, even in the times where we go off map a little bit. Like there's a way in which like you said,
Mhm.
we're gathering things, we're gathering information, we're having experiences, and those are informing the next right step, right, that we take. But like you said, kind of, you were related to, I think, parenting for a moment. And that was definitely the journey that I had, where I knew that it was not going to be okay for me. I had this crisis experience in the early days of my parenting, where I was like, I knew it wasn't going to be okay for me just to pick up a book and read it and try to apply the book. Like, you know what I mean? Like that was never, as desperate as I was to know what to do.
Yeah.
And it really, really, really
Yes.
was at times. I knew it was going to have to come from a place of connection with some guidance within me around how it means to meet this moment right here, right now, with this being in this, whatever they're experiencing, this child, whatever they're experiencing. And it did require that experience of it is a kind of a knowledge. There is a knowledge that's being accessed when I
Mm,
meet the moment, right? But it
yes.
might not be something that I read in a book that I engaged with in a very intellectual way as an idea, but kind of what you were talking about earlier. It has to drop down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
You have to live it, and it
before.
always comes out different, right? That's what's so amazing
Yeah.
to me about people, and why, including all versions and difference and range is important to me because of that, because of the specific unique alchemy. And sometimes it's just hearing someone share in a room the way it felt to close their eyes. They brought some different words or something, a shift in how they perceived it that enriches my experience. And it's those
Yeah.
contacts and those moments of like, we were on this trail and like, where did you go? And they're like, oh my God, you guys, I found this thing. And you hear about it and it shifts what's possible. It shifts my own permission to do that or try that, and those contacts is what, and to me, it's imperative that there's range in that. I'm so bored by a sort of same state response,
Yeah.
like
Oh yeah.
it's
Me
why, I
too.
mean,
Me
yeah,
too.
I think New York City offers that to me all the time, and I talk about it. Um, yeah, but even it's not even, yeah, you could take a
You,
lineup of 10 people that look exactly the same, and I know it's a million times different between them. So I'll just say
yeah,
that
no,
too.
totally. No, I love that idea. And you mentioned, going off path, and someone going off path and kind of reporting what they discovered when they went off path, and it being, something that can illuminate something for someone else, or just spark inspiration. And it reminds me of have you heard of this idea of desire paths? Have you heard of desire paths? I think they're, if I remember correctly, they're basically, So, imagine like in a national forest or somewhere where there are like dedicated paths that people, have made intentionally for people to go in a very particular way through an area, a landscape. Desire paths are these paths that form very organically from people who just feel called to go in one particular direction, that it's not on the dedicated official path. And I love this idea of desire paths. And I love that the word desire is in it, because for me, it speaks so much to this sort of like this really authentic connection to life force, to eros, to desire, in that kind of sense of what it means to be alive in a moment and connected with the world around you, right? In and
Desire
through
as
this body.
navigation too.
Desire as navigation, exactly what I mean. Exactly. So that moment of feeling or being called by something over there, whatever that is, right? And it's a feeling in the body, and you connect with the feeling and you just walk in that direction. That is exactly like a kind of navigation system. And that's something that I feel like our connection to that thing, to eros, to desire, to life force, whatever, however you want to talk about it, I think is one of the things that we are really interested in kind of cultivating or enrooted, right? Like, what does it mean to live our lives from that, from being connected to that?
Which is different from avoiding challenge, because you could say there's a path because there was a tree that fell and they're like, ugh, I don't want to have to get over that. I'm going to do this roundabout way. And that could look like a desire path, right? And in fact, it's like when we're constantly in that nervous system state of safe, not safe, not safe, and if we are creating alternate pathways to always avoid what holds charge, what is activating, what is edgy, that's different from a desire path. Like, it doesn't
different.
feel the same, right?
Absolutely.
And I'm sure it looks
No.
different geographically. I'm sure it looks different. I think that there would be, maybe I'm imagining it in my magical version, the path through the woods looks different because there's a very purposeful avoidance of edge. And so sometimes I think it's that is worth discerning, right? Like, am I moving? Is my impulse taking me away from something or towards something? Because it can look the same. And
Yeah.
that, what you're saying, that navigation system, that like visceral sense of what it is that's moving me. I mean, that's the thing I talk about all the time, like what moves me, is sort of at the core of that, of understanding the system you're being navigated by.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. That's so beautiful. I love that idea. There's I'm laughing because I keep coming back to clown school. I did clown school the other week.
I need to
Did I
hear
tell you that I
about
do?
it.
I didn't tell
You
you I
told me
do
you were
clown
doing it, and I
school.
was like, that's brilliant. I want to hear more.
I just realized it's 9:30 though. It's
I know.
12:30.
I'll give, like, I have like 5:10.
Okay. Well, so I did clown school recently at the clown school here in LA, and I knew I was going to do it. I've been planning on doing it for a long time, but I just decided to jump into an intensive that they were offering in the summer. And so it was like 4 days, 5 hours a day of clowning. And it was amazing in so many ways. I mean, it's relevant to this conversation for all the reasons I think we talked about, related to, the going off map, and the disruption, and the turning on its head what you think, the kind of the ability to step into a space, not just of vulnerability and authenticity, but like it's this, well, it is, but it's the ability, like, of foolishness, of
Play.
ridiculousness,
Yeah.
of play, and like, but to be witnessed fully in that, and also to have a connection with others as you're doing it. I mean, it's a one thing to be goofy in your kitchen, and listen, I can do that like nobody's business, and I'm with my family and my friends.
Yeah.
It's another thing to have it be, to be kind of in front of a group of witnesses watching you access the utterly ridiculousness,
Foolish.
foolishness, debauchery,
Yeah.
raucousness. Like it's so interesting. We had this, there's this one game that we played where, the teacher of this class, who is truly amazing, incredible British humor. And he was like, he warns you that, part of this experience is being ridiculed, and I personally love that. And I actually wished he had ridiculed me more than he did. I wanted to be made fun of. Do you know what I mean? I wanted
Yes.
to not take myself so effing seriously for once. And I can be so goofy, but I just recognize how, how it is true. I would say I'm not a performer, but how true it is that in certain situations, I feel like I'm performing to a particular expectation that I feel is present. Of course I am.
Right.
So there was this game where he was, he's making this, we're in LA. So he's like making these jokes, like, I'm connected with, CIA agent. And I didn't mention this to you guys, but they're going to be coming to, they're going to give an opportunity to a few people to audition. So we're going to do this kind of like mock audition. So you had like 3 chairs in the center of the stage. And 3 people from the group, we had about 25 people, could go up and sit in those chairs. And then one by one, they would go up in front of everybody and audition. And what you do is literally open. Like you can literally do anything, and you don't, the invitation is not to plan it. Right.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting there for the longest time. I'm like, I don't have to go up. I don't have to go up. But what's really annoying me, and I don't know if you're like this, but like, as soon as I know that I'm afraid of something, but my reasons for being afraid of that thing are not
Grounded. No, I know. Absolutely.
Totally. Or the thing that I'm afraid, like the thing that is on the other side, that fear is something I really want. I want to know what that's like. Then I can't not do it. Like I have to do it, because I will regret it so deeply if I don't risk it. So I went up, but it was very interesting. I didn't go up until, because basically what would happen is people would go up and they would do something for their audition. And then the clown teacher would either bang a drum, which means you have to do it again, you try again because you failed, or you'd get a call back and then you could go sit down and someone else would go up. So I didn't go up until I knew I had at least 2 things that I could do. I knew already. I was like, okay, all right, I know that this is not the invitation, but this is my kind of inching my way towards this experience. I need to have something. And then for the 3rd thing, I won't plan anything at all. And if I go up, if I don't get a call back, I'll just go up there and make a fool of myself. So I definitely achieved, I think, making a fool of myself. But it was just so interesting to me, Weena, in that experience, how illuminating it was for me to truly reckon with how okay I am actually to look like a fool.
You're uncoupling foolishness with like threat.
Absolutely. That's a beautiful way of saying it. I'm uncoupling foolishness with threat. Yeah. I mean, I don't know who isn't in some ways, I guess. I mean, given whiteness's proclivity for perfectionism and authority and clarity, and and like again, we're talking about not an either or, but a both and. But it was so shocking to me just how deep the performance part was. Even though I feel like I can show up very vulnerably, I can show up very authentically at times, there is still a fear of foolishness that lives in there, that the clown
I want to know what happened after. Like, what was your experience after you did the foolishness? And then like, what was the feeling?
I felt totally okay. I don't know how else to describe that. There is something that has been building over the course of several years now. I think part of it has been being enrooted, being a facilitator in different spaces, being in some ways more public with my life in some ways, that I think has sown this experience of like, yeah, it's really uncomfortable. That was really uncomfortable. And it's okay. It's kind of really okay. I don't know how else to describe that. I mean, if it weren't, then I don't know, not that I wouldn't do it, but there are certain things I wouldn't let live. I send emails out. We have these podcast conversations, and I know you and well enough to know that you and I have talked about this. Like, we don't want the words that we say today to be like etched in stone and live forever as like, this is what I think. This is how I
Positive.
am. I want to be ever evolving and free to do that. And yet we just kind of let it be out there and let it do its thing in the world and kind of oddly trust it without knowing what that will be or what people will think or how they'll feel or whatever. And it's kind of like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
I'm all right.
That's so interesting. I think I'm going to be offering a seam for performers because there's so many layers. Because even in the clowning, you get to a certain place where that actually becomes a mechanism for protection. So it's not even uncomfortable anymore. It's actually comfortable, right? So then there's so many layers of how we're so intelligent in creating strategies for safety, which is great. We need them. And it's like, what are we missing out by being limited by those strategies? And I think it's
100%.
like so effing brave and phenomenal that you're like stepping into clowning intensive. Like, who does that? That's I love that there's like this thing that sounds terrifying, like, let me go do that
Yes.
about you. I love it. And I think it's different from I want to like it's not the avoid lure. I can feel it in the way you're saying it. It's like you described. There's something past that that will be there. And even if it's simply just uncoupling being seen that way with threat, that loosening is so creates so many possibilities or spaces that weren't there before.
Yeah,
And like how
totally.
brilliant that that some part of you knows that's the knowing part that you're like, I know this is true.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I kind of I hope that this is interesting and relevant for people who kind of either know rooted, who are resonant with rooted, like what it means to kind of move in space like that, kind of
Yeah.
risk and retreat and I don't know. It's anyway. I'm trying to kind of bring a little summary to kind of our conversation and how it pertains to rooted. But I think, yeah, I guess what it comes down to is really this idea that there's no prescriptive way of meeting the moment. There's something else that's being kind of we're being called into, and I feel like we are in these very subtle ways that aren't necessary. Sometimes it seems it's a direct kind of invitation with, I imagine, but like even in other spaces, there's this ongoing kind of dance with what it means to meet this moment authentically. And there's no one formulaic way of doing that.
Mm-mm.
And being in a space that is okay with that and is encouraging of that, and to kind of fumble our way with that and make mistakes with that and be brave one day and not the next. And like, I fucking love that. Excuse me. I just,
Mhm.
I really, really love that. I need that in my life. Because where else am I getting that? Maybe at clown
100%.
school.
Yeah. No, I mean, you just described why I'm here and why I've
That's why we're
stayed
here. I
here.
love you so much. I want to do it with you, Weena.
I know. I mean, Kareen, like from the beginning, I can't imagine it any other way. And if it didn't
Yeah.
have that, I don't have a lot of longevity for spaces that don't hold that possibility and invitation. So
Yeah. Same. Same. All right, my love. I know that you have to
I forgot.
go, and I just want to say thank you so much. It was so fun. I feel like I want to have another follow-up conversation
Me
at some point
too. Yeah, I
so we
know.
can
We
keep
just dipped
talking
in.
about it.
There's like a million tide pools and we
I
just went in one.
literally just dipped in. Yeah, that's how I feel right now too. I'm like trying
Okay.
to hold it back because I know you got to go do your thing. But I love you so
Yeah.
much,
I
and
love
we'll talk
you.
soon. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks, Queen.
Mwah.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you for joining us today. We don't take for granted what it means to dedicate your time and energy to us, so thank you for listening. And if you're curious to learn more about what we get up to in Rooted, check out rootedglobalvillage.com or follow us on Instagram at tending.the.roots. Be well.